It's almost like you have to take your cell and force it to use carbs. It's almost like you have to hold it underwater long enough that it just has no choice but to gasp and like take in some carbohydrates. But if you tell it to someone that's insulin resistant, that just doesn't make sense. And it's not really that way, right? We can't take someone that is insulin resistant and just pound carbs down them until they start learning how to use carbs, right? That's probably how a lot of people ended up insulin resistant in the first place. And we also need to understand that insulin resistance is not necessarily caused by the carbs. The inability to utilize the carbs are a downstream side effect of the insulin resistance, which really comes from inflammation in the first place, which could be caused by a number of different things, carbohydrates potentially being one of them. So we're going to talk about the one time you can really use carbohydrates and actually train your body to use them properly, utilizing what's called glucose tolerance and how we can do this. So let's go ahead and jump into it. And then after today, I put a link down below for 30% off Thrive Market. I know I've talked about them a lot, but they're really stepping up their game even more when it comes to ingredient quality. So if you look on their website, they're going to have things that we want to see. They're not adding weird things into their foods. They're not getting from suppliers that have nefarious ingredients. They vet everything. Almost like you can go there and rest assured that the foods that they have good ingredients. Not to mention having a 30% off discount on your first grocery order. I don't know, that's pretty darn awesome to me. So 30% off plus a free gift when you use that link down below, and it gets delivered right to your doorstep in just a couple of days. So a lot of this has to do with building glucose tolerance. Now, the reason that I'm bringing this up is because a lot of people have been talking about the sugar diet or sugar fasting recently. Although I'm not the biggest fan of it, I understand where people are going with it. You see, you are met with like initial insulin resistance like crazy up until you get to a point where your body adapts very fast. Now, this is not a video condoning the sugar diet. That's not what I'm talking about. What I want to talk about is how you can use carbs to potentially improve your insulin resistance. Because what happens is you have a degree of insulin resistance that's occurring and your cells are not able to utilize glucose. So as a result, your glucose stays high, your blood glucose stays high. So a lot of people say, hey, going low carb is a great way to cut off the white noise and allow that cell to regain its sensitivity again and allow the pancreatic beta cells to produce insulin again. And it's clearly been demonstrated that that works. But what some of the other side is saying is, well, what about training your body to use carbs by going in a relative deficit and going very high carb, relatively even high sugar, so that the body has no choice but to adapt if it wants any fuel whatsoever. It's all very fringe, and we can't take it and say this is evidence-based, but it's working for people. Like we're seeing Cole Robinson talking about it, the snake diet guy. He's been talking about it a lot, and it's working for a lot of people. Now, I take a more conservative approach when it comes to that, and I look at this and I say, what are some ways that we can start to improve glucose tolerance, which is the ability to use carbs properly? How do we restore glucose tolerance? Now, mind you, I was type 2 diabetic for a number of years. Okay, when I was very overweight, I restored that function by going very low carb for about 10 years. And as a result of that, I actually made myself insulin resistant when I would have carbohydrates because my glucose tolerance would be so poor. My body was so not used to carbohydrates that it would actually send my blood glucose really high when I would have them, even though my insulin sensitivity on the surface would have been good, right? Now, that didn't last long. It took about 2 to 4 weeks for me to restore function. Okay, and that's kind of what we see in the rodent model studies. We see within a few days, which translates to a few weeks, rodents that are going very low carb and then add carbs back in. It takes them a couple weeks to kind of regain the glucose tolerance. But when you have carbohydrates intra-workout or while you're moving, you can get the cell to take up glucose without insulin being present. It's called the insulin-independent glucose uptake. Mouthful, but it's really pretty simple and spelled out. It's insulin independent, so happens independent of insulin, glucose uptake. When you are moving your muscle cells will actually soak up glucose without the presence of insulin. So that means you do not need to tax the pancreas, you do not need to ask anything of the pancreatic beta cells. So when you're working out, albeit it should be a pretty intense workout, that would be the best time to consume something like watermelon. Watermelon would be a great thing to consume because you're getting a good combination of glucose and fructose in a small amount that is mostly 92% water. You're also getting citrulline, so you're getting an increase in blood flow That increase in blood flow is going to allow that hydration and that small amount of glucose to get into the cells properly, not to mention give you a nice pump. But the cell's going to take up that glucose without insulin, which means you're going to be able to start developing the metabolic machinery inside the cell to use glucose properly, even though you're not taxing the liver or the pancreas at all. So it's almost like you consume the carbohydrates in a decent amount, small amount, moderate amount. Your cells use them, the mitochondria gets readapted, and then you can start kind of adding them back in a little bit. Now, you may be someone that doesn't want to consume carbs at all. That's kind of me. I don't really have them except for at night. Now, I like being relatively low carb, but one of the things that's made me who I am on the internet is that I'm not dogmatic about that. I know how to have carbs, and I can instruct people on how to have carbs. And the fact is, we do have to come to the really strong terms that the carbs themselves are not the problem. We are perfectly designed to use carbs. What's the bigger problem? Why are we in a position where we cannot process carbs right? Why are we in a position where we have carbs and we're insulin resistant and we don't use them? It's because there's other underlying metabolic things. So I want you to remember that insulin resistance is happening on a couple different axes here. We have the pancreatic side and we have the actual cellular side. We can fix some of the cellular side by having carbohydrates while we train, but also, well, not having carbs while we train, right? So we develop more sensitivity by working out in a fasted state. We develop more tolerance by working out in a carb-fueled state, but not overdoing it. So it's not like having carbs a half an hour before your workout. That's not the same. That is going to spike insulin. That is going to raise your blood glucose. I'm talking about carbs while you are actively working out. Being the guy drinking watermelon juice or eating watermelon intra-workout. You're going to look crazy if you do it at a public gym, maybe not with watermelon juice, but if you train in your garage, trust me, it's the one time you can have carbohydrates where it's not going to affect insulin resistance and it might even help it. And then you can see if you add carbs in after that, does your glucose respond a little bit better? Do you not spike as high? Do things start to get better? You have to try it out for yourself. But the proof is in the pudding. Like, people are having success with this whole sugar diet thing. And I'm not here to say go and do it. I'm here to say maybe start with this and see how it works for you and see what happens. But regardless, even if you're low carb, it's a nice time to have carbs and not have to deal with an insulin spike. I'll see you tomorrow.